Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builders Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Transatlantic. This is their part number Dl Lsv40 Us10B. In essence, this is a grade 2 lever privacy set in oil rubbed bronze with that typical handicap compliant lever with the angled return back to the face of the door. Also, in summary, this is a fantastic lock. If you are an installer of doors and frames, let's say you're a subcontractor and you do carpentry subcontracting, you supply doors and frames, commercial tenant build-outs, strip mall facilities with the variety of cell phone companies, tenants, clothing stores, small fast food places, coffee shops. This likely could be a great lock for you to use in those installations. Now, realistically, being commercial and going to be possibly prone to having exposure to public access, a grade 2 lock may be just simply insufficient for the application. However, we sell these for those applications all the time, and the logic is that it's such a great lock, it's such a great value, that if it were to fail under the duress of significant use that it's not designed for or abuse, it can be replaced. Because, you know, outright damage to a door lock doesn't necessarily mean that a lock that is orders of magnitude more costly than this will survive an attack any better than this lock will. But under normal use, this is a great lock, and we've been selling this for a couple of decades, most likely. The only thing that makes it less common, of course, is in that scenario you're going to sell satin chrome. But this is a grade 2 lever lock, okay? It's a privacy. You're going to use this on bathroom functions, obviously. Nice lever return springs. The installation of this lock is very simple and straightforward. And it has, I have to tell you, it has a nice oil rubbed bronze finish on it. Oil rubbed bronze being a living finish, it will be one that is inconsistent from piece of hardware to piece of hardware and will change with time, but that's precisely why people will buy this sort of lock. Nice large lever, spring cage packet inside of here in this housing, which is the telltale sign is that little piece of metal sticking out of it that will engage the lever, that will allow the lever to return to vertical, to horizontal. Mounting plate. And this is really what you're starting with. Privacy function. Rotating the inside. Okay. Typical handicap compliant lever. The lock itself, again, is designed for a grade 2 installation, which means that it's rated for 500,000 cycles. A grade 1 would be 1,000,000 cycle, and those locks, and grade 2 as well, you know, not that they don't exceed that or they stop working at that point. They must meet that as a minimum. I've sold lever locks like this that 15 years ago, and I know they're still working. So, you know, in a very popular, you know, coffee establishment. ADA compliant, solid zinc die cast, so the material is heavy, and it will still afford, zinc as a base material will afford a faithful finish to what the intended finish is to be. They'll call this US10B oil rub bronze because they can't call it 613 because it's not made of brass, but it's a very nice finish, no problem with that. It's going to be, speaking of finishes, it will be available in satin chrome, obviously, polished brass, and oil rub bronze, those 3 finishes. It's a privacy function, push button locking, okay? One nice feature about this lock that you don't get in all locks is, imagine this. The user goes in, privacy, the user exits, rotates that lever, and I don't know if you heard that or not, rotates that lever. It will unlock the lock, but then wants to play a joke on his friend, so he'll push the button in when the door is open and then pull the door closed. Well, when that happens, and I'll show you the latch bolt in a moment. When that happens and the door is pulled closed, when that latch bolt is depressed, it will unlock the lock again. A nice feature of this lock so that you prevent that sort of unauthorized use of the lock where you're intentionally locking the door behind you. Non-handed, fully reversible, okay? Features through bolts, which are optional, in fact. Now, the hardware package that we're going to get with this, and here's your latch bolt. It's called a spring latch. There's no dead latch. There's no little tongue behind here because it's a non-keyed function. Here's how that's demonstrated. I've locked it. Latch bolt gets depressed. Okay. 2 3/4 only. You can order 2 3/8 separately. You'll have to order that separately, but being a commercial lock, 2 3/4 is what you're going to get. 4 7/8 strike plate. That's called an ASA strike. It's 4 7/8 tall and is what you're going to see in your hollow metal frame installations. Okay, now the through bolts is where we were at earlier. You've got your 2 1/8 inch hole, and installation instructions are linked to down below here, as is the template. So you'll want to review that along with the product brochure. But to the template first, that preparation that the door will require is going to be called what is known as a 161 prep. It's a 2 1/8 inch hole, 2 3/4 back set, edge of the door to the center of the hole. The edge preparation is going to be 1 1/8 wide, 2 1/4 tall, 5/32 deep. In a typical hollow metal door application, at the 3 and 9 o'clock positions, you'll have a small little semicircle. That's to accommodate the prongs that are here and here, which just simply help to prevent rotation over time of the lock. And if it's a wood door, that's okay. Those prongs are meant to bite into the face of the door. So when you are installing the lock onto the door, make sure that you get that completely vertical and completely horizontal when you tighten the screws down to make those prongs bite into the face of the door. You want to just be sure that it's completely, you really can't install it crooked, so to speak, but you could make it 1 degree off, which is going to affect long-term proper operation, short-term proper operation of the lock as well. So you've got your hole drilled. You can simply then install this with just 2 screws right through the plate and right here if you want to. It's really, of course, recommended that you install the material with the through bolts that are included because there's so much potential torque and rotational force that you can put on the lock. You can easily damage the lock or bring it to end of life prematurely if you don't have the through bolt holes at 12 and 6 o'clock, which are referred to in the template, to help for those 2 posts to keep that lock from rotating over time. And those are very simply a great way to get very long-term sort of installation success out of the lock. And the instructions are included. You know, obviously when the lock arrives to you, you'll be able to review that prior to purchase from the link that's provided below. These instructions haven't changed in years, nor has the lock, which is a good thing. And installing the through bolts will be done by simply removing this lever, and then you're going to seat the head of the through bolt, which has this square profile to it here. That's going to seat down inside of here. So when you pop that lever off using the tool that's actually included, a spanner wrench, using this end, you'll be able to pull that outer rose off, get that bolt set in there, and then it will set underneath the shoulder. I keep pointing here, it's actually here, sorry, here and here. It will sit underneath there so that now you've got a couple of posts sticking out. When you put that outside rose back on, then the lever, you've got the 2 posts coming out. Then what you'll do is your plate will go on. You'll run your machine screws through these holes into here and here. But then you're going to run the screws to go into your through bolts underneath the rows, the interior rows, there and there. And you'll run it all the way through. Then your finished scalp plate will just go right back on, and it just rotates on and then stays captive. Okay, so the two male bolts will come out this side and thread into the posts from the exterior female portion of the through bolt assembly. Absolutely recommended that you just simply install it that way to begin with. And again, the template does give you that. They give you the installation, the template for both 2 3/8 and 2 3/4. Be mindful that the one you're going to get is 2 3/4 if you're drilling a hole. After that, your installation is basically complete. You've obviously installed the latch bolt first before you've put the lock together. You've got finished screws for the strike and the latch bolt. Why do we have more than we need here? No idea why you have more than necessary. They do show installation instructions where you're running additional screws through the plate. Like if you were not going to use the through bolts, you could run those. That's probably what those certainly are for. Yeah, that makes sense. You would use those screws in these positions, which certainly would not be a harmful thing whatsoever. With this plate from these holes here, these 4 outer holes, completely fixed to the door, that will transfer the exterior's ability when screwed through here and the through bolts, the ability to resist rotation as well. So if you were going to forego the through bolts because you don't want to drill the holes, you would take those extra screws and run them here and here, is how that would work. You'd put them in regardless. If it's a wood door, that's fairly easy. If it's a steel door, it's a lot of additional drilling that frankly is just never done. Not that I really ever see. The strike plate, again, hollow metal frame. If you've got a wood frame, this can still work. It's just larger than standard. You can purchase separate strikes available from Transatlantic, so feel free to reach out to us regarding that. Looking at the balance of the installation instructions, it shows the schematic, if you're following along, of all of the parts that are defined. With a privacy set like this, you'd remove that exterior lever to gain access underneath the rows to install the female end of the through bolts, but if you're not going to use those, then you probably don't need to remove that at all. A keyed lock, it gives installation instructions there if this was a keyed function on how to remove that exterior lever. Prepping the door for the lock itself, the 2 1/8 inch hole, 2 3/4 back set's detailed in step 1. Step 2 really just pictorially shows you how to install the lock without the through bolts. Step 3 shows you how to marry the lock case over the end of the latch bolt into the door. And at that point, you're going to want to make sure that the latch bolt operates freely, that the preparation you've done in the door is not constricting the lock at all. A misdrilled hole, too small, not straight, is going to hamper this lock's ability to simply operate correctly. Screws that are turned too tight will allow the lock to not work safely as well, or properly as well. So be sure not to overturn the screws. Don't use a cordless drill or an impact wrench. This sort of lock sets, if you had a very low voltage, tiny little handheld screwdriver to do the majority of the work, that would be fine. But doing the final turning by hand allows you to understand just exactly how tight you're making it. You don't want to set up all these locks to find out that you have to go back and adjust them, because when you rotate the lever, it stays in the down position. That's because the internal components of the lock is too compressed and is not operating freely. The balance of the installation instructions show the interior that we've gone over, the interior half of the lock, how to install it, adjusting it for door thickness. If you've got an 1 3/4 door, very little adjustment, if any, will be necessary. And then step 10, strike installation, mortise it, or just screw it in. With a hollow metal frame, you might need to get in there and clear out some paint. You might need to, and it's certainly officially suggested that you run a tap into the holes prior to running the screws in, you can easily ruin an installation of a strike because you didn't clear the paint out of the taps in the drilled and tapped reinforcing plate in the back of the hollow metal frame. You want to clean that out first. And then step 11 is how to work on a cylinder should this be a keyed lock, if you need to remove that. We've exhausted all of the parts that are on my desk except to say that this is the end of the wrench that you'll use. You won't use this end at all because there is no function of a hole. Well, actually there is. Forgive me, it's right here. And what you do is you rotate this scalp plate. To be able to remove it from the lock. So you use the other end of the, yeah, of course, you'd use the other end. I find that I can usually just turn those by hand, is why I don't usually end up using that wrench. And that gets it tightened down onto the installation. As you hopefully can tell, I'm a fan of this lock. My family's been selling the Transatlantic line of hardware, I think, since the 1970s. And it's because it's a great quality line of hardware. If you're that person we talked about in the beginning, a subcontractor who supplies and installs doors, some other carpentry, let's say, you're going to want to look for Transatlantic when it comes to hinges, door closers, exit devices, and lock sets. If you're doing typical common sort of interior construction build-out work, Transatlantic is an absolute no-brainer. Great value, great quality. You would be able to supply the material on the job to your client and say, listen, what's been specified is this. This stuff works equally well. Compare the quality, compare the price, make a decision. We have people that are converts to the Transatlantic line, TACO, they call it. A customer will walk in and say, give me that taco door closer, Transatlantic company. That's how they know it. Because why? Because it's a great door closer. It's inexpensive and it just works. There are countless bathrooms in the city of Chicago in restaurants that have taco door closers on them because the restaurateurs, it's inexpensive and it's high performance. And you just can't beat that. And the value that existed on that closer 2 decades ago is the same value that exists today. They've not changed it whatsoever. So yes, I am partial to the line for primarily their exit devices. That is a tremendous exit device. I've in 25 years I've had one of their exit devices fail, and that's because a client welded it to the door and literally melted the spring that operates the latch bolt. And when I got to the job site after the client called upset that the panic device was garbage, there's not 1800 degree Fahrenheit against a small spring. So anyway, Transatlantic 1, welding hardware installer 0. Finally, there's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Transatlantic products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. If you have any questions on the Transatlantic, their Dl Lsv40 function, and that's where the privacy comes in, it's a 40 function. Lever privacy set in a 10B finish, oil rubbed, or satin chrome, or polished brass, or any other Transatlantic product, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.